He was the strongest and most brutal member of the Shadow family, troubled house of assassins and spies who did all sorts of dirty work. After dedicating his entire life to the family, Sal Cooper was betrayed. One of the nobles accused him of treason and conspiracy against them, and for that he was sentenced to execution by 100 sword strikes to the back. In other words, he was deceived by the family and the master he trusted. In the end, he died unjustly. Fortunately, he was reborn, returning to the past with tremendous hatred. Even though he was only 3 years old, he swore revenge against all those who betrayed him, as he would simply return the favor. But before that, the story begins with Sal Cooper, who had become the most useful shadow of the Cooper family. However, he was sentenced to death by the other members. When he learned of this, he tried to fight back, but they attacked him, carving his back with blades. In the midst of all this, he thought that if there were a next life, he would take revenge on everyone. It was at that moment that he woke up, lying on a bed of straw. As soon as he stood up, he realized that everything was very familiar. One of the maids appeared, ordering him to clean himself up, as someone would be coming to get him. Sal looked at her with an expression of rage, but the maid, without hesitation, slapped him across the face, reminding him that he was just a brat. Lying on the floor, he saw his reflection in the water, and in that instant realized that he had returned to the past when he was only 3 years old. In his previous life, he had endured the cruelest training imaginable, carrying out all kinds of dirty work in the shadows. As a reward, the family showered him with riches, and that's why the shadows endured the pain. As an illegitimate son, he was determined to change his fate. Although he had no talent, he picked up a sword and trained to his limit. Always neglected, he took the initiative to fight for the family. To do this, he decapitated enemies and destroyed entire cities. After countless massacres, he won victory for the family. He thought he would be greeted with respect for being strong, but what he found were 100 spears carving into his back. That was how he discovered the truth about the shadows. The master he trusted revealed that by becoming a shadow, Sal had made an oath. All the strength he gained would be transferred to the master, and any harm the master suffered would be felt by Sal. The most unfair thing imaginable. Upon hearing this, Sal, enraged, attacked the master with his sword, cutting his shoulder. However, the damage returned to him, and that was how he understood the true meaning of the cursed oath. His power had been stolen, and his back was carved up. Because of this, in this new life, he swore that he wouldn't make the same mistake. But at that moment, his stomach growled with hunger, as if he hadn't eaten in over 3 days. While watching a little rat pass by him, he remembered that on the battlefield, his favorite food had been precisely a rat. As he thought about catching it, someone opened the curtain and called him trash, saying that young Master Alan wanted to see him. Sal was taken, reflecting that at this time, he had been chosen to become one of the shadows, and it was probably around this period that he was cursed by the oath. But this time, he wouldn't let it happen. Suddenly, Sal bit the hand of the man holding him. The attacker tried to shake him off, calling him a stray dog. Another man came from behind with a strong punch, but Sal lowered his head and dodged. He took the opportunity, grabbed the distracted enemy's sword, and chopped off his arm, warning him not to underestimate him. He was ready to start his revenge against the Cooper family. After that, the story of the Shadow's oath is explained. It's an ancient blood magic, where the master pays the price with his own blood to turn someone into his shadow. The shadow cannot harm the master and must suffer in his place. Furthermore, all the growth the shadow experiences will be transferred to the master, meaning it's practically a slavery contract. This cruel method kept the empire in order for hundreds of years. One of the knights was slapped in the face as young Master Alan called him trash for being intimidated by a wild dog. Alan Cooper was the heir to the family. The man apologized to the young master and Alan left, saying that Sal had dared to touch his people. For that reason, he sadistically ordered that Sal be locked in a dungeon. The other members agreed until a voice ordered Alan to wait. It was Harem Cooper, the matriarch of the family. She said that no one had cared for that child since he was little, so it was normal for him to act like a cannibal. She reminded them that the most important thing at that moment was the oath ceremony and ordered Alan not to forget what was to be carried out that day. Alan, for his part, thought he had no idea why that child had been chosen as his shadow, but he was sure that Sal would be destroyed in the future. The mother left, giving orders to clear the place except for the young master. Then she ordered a soundproofing spell to be cast to avoid interruptions during the ceremony. Steuben, a cup of water was passed around. Alan raised it and declared that from that moment on, they would all become members of the Shadow Army. Thus, they began to take the oath. The other children shouted that in the name of the Shadow, they swore to dedicate their lie. Suddenly, everyone collapsed on the ground, unconscious. From a distance, Alace laughed and called them all fools for drinking poisoned water, thinking it was holy water. He began using blood magic. As the blood fell, a magic circle opened and he declared that they would all be his eternal servants. This was the oath mentioned earlier. Meanwhile, one of the boys felt the power entering his body and terrified screamed, calling for his mother. But at that moment, his legs locked and he fell to the ground. He looked at his legs, trying to understand why they wouldn't move, and began to scream and cry, calling out for his mother again. A voice behind him said he was just a crying baby who couldn't do anything without his mother. The same person continued, "No matter how much you scream, your mother cast a spell of enchantment on this room to prevent any sound from escaping." There stood Sal Cooper with his sword. The boy asked how Sal had managed to stay awake, but Sal, sinister as ever, replied, "What if I reverse the oath? What would you do?" At that moment, he plunged the sword into the ground and an explosion of energy erupted. Alan felt felt tremendous pain in his heart and desperate, asked what that lunatic was doing. Of course, it was nothing good, he thought. Sal Cooper remembered his past life, in which he paid with his own life to claim what was his. But in this life, he was determined to just return the favor to this damned family. From outside, screams could be heard. The knights commented that the spell had been broken. The matriarch, worried, called for her son. The scene shifted to the family's castle at night. Inside a room, someone said that the young master was fine, that he had only fainted from the amount of power he used. They also commented that the sound spell had been broken because one of the servants got distracted during the process. The woman, cold as ice, ordered that the body of the one who made the mistake be fed to the dogs. Even so, the man mentioned that Alan seemed restless and he himself couldn't remember anything that had happened. The mother then placed her hand on Alan's head and told him not to worry about the shadows, as the strong are always prey for the weak in this game. At that moment, Alan pushed her hand away, acting like a maniac, shouting that he was the only head of the Cooper family and that those creatures owed their lives to him. The mother laughed, agreeing, and asked what kind of reward he would like for doing such a good job. Little did she know what had really happened. Sal Cooper, watching everything, thought that the connection between him and Alan was strong, but unfortunately for Alan, from now on he would be his shadow. Sal recalled that in his past life, while fighting, he had discovered a record about an index of blood magic. Happy he had shown it to the family, not knowing that he had already been sacrificed by them. However, this time, Sal had read the content of the book, and combining that with his life experience, he knew that he only needed a little blood to reverse the oath and switch places with Alan. Even though he was weak and only 3 years old, he was determined to grow stronger and stronger to complete his revenge. The scene shifted to a burning cliff, the Cooper family's testing ground, created to select the strongest shadows. It was similar to the legend of Prometheus, who stole fire for humanity and was condemned to be devoured by an eagle day after day. The Cooper family threw children under the age of 10 into this cliff, ordering them to walk among thorns until the eagles began to tear their flesh apart. Even in their dying breaths, they couldn't give up until the first shadow climbed the peak and received the blessing of the griffin eagles. That shadow gained a body that could never be wounded, no matter how much it was attacked. Someone remarked that they had only 3 days to complete the test, and the sole objective was to reach the top of the mountain alive. The speaker was Enos Walker, the shadow training officer. He reminded everyone that deserters would be sentenced to death after 3 days. He then blew a whistle, wishing a bright future for the shadows. The children started running while Enos watched a strange boy. This boy, Sal Cooper, moved slowly, unhurried, and confident. One of the soldiers behind him commented that this was Sal Cooper, the illegitimate son who had angered young Master Alan the day before. Watching the scene, he laughed, saying, "Oh, it's that boy." Sal began climbing the mountain, not up the slope like the others, but scaling the cliff wall with his bare hands. They laughed, calling him an idiot, commenting that he would probably fall before reaching the top. But soon another soldier had an interesting idea. This was the perfect moment to act. The children looked up and asked what that was flying above them. A giant eagle was coming their way. Sal Cooper was nearly at the top when he spotted an enormous griffin. As he climbed, the griffin eyed him with a thirst for blood. One of the boys drew his bow and prepared an arrow, taking the opportunity to eliminate Sal, who had angered young Master Alan. He aimed to hit the griffin, but the arrow barely grazed it. As Sal Cooper reached the top, he confronted the griffin. He knew from his past life that the only way to quickly scale the peak and ensure his survival was to obtain the griffin's blessing, and that could only be achieved by taming the creature. He raised his sword over the griffin's head and delivered a powerful blow, decapitating the cunning beast. Immediately afterward, he jumped back, thinking, griffins are naturally cunning creatures, with intelligence comparable to humans. If I don't completely dominate it, it will never be tamed. He charged again, focusing on using the technique Shadow Blade, third form cut. However, the griffin opened its mouth and unleashed a powerful wind attack, swirling through the air. The force was so strong that it knocked Sal Cooper off the cliff. Luckily, he managed to grab on with one hand and with great effort climbed back up. He realized he had been careless. Being only 3 years old with his still limited physique, he knew he would be thrown far away before even getting close to the griffin. It was then that he spotted an opportunity. He could reach a nearby cave. While he thought about this, the griffin was already preparing another attack. From its mouth, it launched powerful wind orbs. Sal Cooper ran, dodging from side to side, knowing that with each orb, the wind's power increased. And if the griffin launched the 10th orb, not even 100 warriors could escape. At that moment, Sal had a brilliant idea. He decided to stop dodging the attacks and face them head on. He would use the force of the wind to propel himself into the cave, and so he did, being hurled directly into the cave. Inside, to conserve energy, he activated the Shadow Oath, absorbing the strength of an ally, Juan Cooper, who collapsed to the ground exhausted. This was one of the benefits of possessing shadows. Seizing the opportunity, Sal ventured deeper into the cave. The determined griffin flew in after him, declaring that no matter how much he ran, he wouldn't escape. When the griffin reached the cave's entrance, it looked seriously at Sal and asked what was happening. Sal Cooper, cold and calculating, held the griffin's hatchling in the tip of his blade. Few people in the world knew that powerful griffins were born with broken wings, unable to fly. The giant griffin asked what Sal intended to do with its child, but he replied that he had no intention of harming it. On the contrary, he could heal the hatchling's wings and help it fly, but there was a condition. Down below, some guards commented that there was no more noise and assumed that Sal had been devoured by the griffin. They walked away satisfied, thinking that young Master Alan would be pleased with the news. However, However, at that moment, an immense power surged behind them. Sal Cooper was riding the griffin, which began attacking the guards, fulfilling its part of the deal. The griffin asked Sal about their next mission. He responded seriously, "Take me to the secret kingdom in the far north of the range, the land of stone." In front of a giant door, the griffin told him that, as agreed, Sal could take Perseus' sword or something similar. In return, Sal would help the griffin obtain Medusa's blood, which could heal a hatchling. Sal smiled, saying it wasn't a problem, but that his true goal wasn't the sacred sword, nor to help the griffin. What he really wanted was something entirely different. When they opened the door, they were faced with an enormous head full of snakes, Medusa. Surrounding her were giant statues. Sal thought about how in Alan's past life, when he was 12, the Empress had sent the shadow troops to retrieve Perseus' sword. They faced Medusa, whose powers turned any living thing into stone. As a result, many shadows died, but Alan, with his talent, managed to retrieve the sword and became the chosen one, gaining resources and loyal subordinates, all at the cost of the children who died. In this life, Sal was determined not to let Alan claim the sword again. The griffin asked where the sword and Medusa's blood were. He also noticed several broken stones on the ground and wanted to know the reason. At that moment, the door slammed shut with a thunderous sound. Alarmed, the griffin asked if Sal was playing tricks on him. But Sal, with a serious expression, simply murmured, "Behind you." The statues and Medusa were moving, advancing toward them. The griffin used all his strength, resembling a muscular giant, and began to battle the statues. Meanwhile, Sal was running, reflecting that these statues could rebuild themselves. As he fell to the ground, he recalled that these three statues had no internal organs, just like the Greya sisters from mythology, who shared the same eye and tooth. As daughters of sea deities, they had the ability to control water. Suddenly, the cave began to fill with water. A massive wave was rushing towards Sal and the griffin. The griffin, concerned, shouted to Sal that if they continued like this, the entire place would collapse and they would both die. Sal asked if there was something written in the runes on the wall, but inside he was laughing. He knew the secret realm was about to collapse, but he also knew of a secret escape route from that cave, a secret he had discovered in his previous life. But this amount of destruction wasn't enough yet. Sal Cooper ran to the other side and shouted to the griffin, "Hey Griffin, the runes say to remove the eye from up there. They'll stop attacking if you do that." The griffin looked serious and responded, "Oh, alright." At that moment, he rushed to remove the eye. Upon doing so, the statues froze, staring seriously. They began to scream as the griffin commented that the creatures had turned into water and fell below. Sal then explained the runes. They say Perseus only discovered Medusa's location after stealing the eye from the Greya sisters. The eye was their weakness. The griffin impatiently asked, "And the sword and the blood to save my son, where are they?" Perseus' sword was right there beside them. The same sword used to decapitate Medusa, spilling red and green blood. The red blood, according to legend, could poison all living souls to death, while the green blood could heal any disease. But those were just stories from that secret realm. There was another mystery: the emergence of Perseus' sword and the resurrection of Medusa. As soon as the sword appeared, Medusa manifested as well, now alive again, advancing to attack the two of them. She was enormous, with her snake hair rapidly moving toward them. Sal Cooper began to run, shouting, "Okay, I think it's time for me to leave because once activated, Medusa's statue won't stop until it's decapitated with Perseus' sword." But as he tried to escape, one of the snake tails came toward him, forcing him to dodge to the other side. Medusa watched him coldly. Not understanding the situation, he yelled, "Griffin, where are you?" The griffin, clever, had already shrunk in size and was hiding, saying, "I realized it won't be easy to deal with this, and I don't want to die either." Sal knew the situation was dire, but luckily he had already completed this secret realm in his previous life. He knew what needed to be done. First, he would have to grab the shields from the Knights of the Round Table, which were just ahead. With those shields, he could use their reflection to avoid looking directly into Medusa's eyes and at the same time protect himself from her visual attack, similar to Superman's eye beam. Even holding the shield firmly, the impact was so strong that Sal was thrown far away. He thought the shield alone wouldn't be enough, and to make matters worse, the exit had been destroyed. He ran, reflecting that with the current level of his talents, survival would be difficult, but he had to try. After all, he was in a different life than the last. When he placed his hand on Perseus' sword, Sal managed to wield it. However, in that same instant, a snake pierced through him. He wondered what was happening when Medusa's face appeared before him. He remembered his past life when Alan Cooper said his D-rank talent was useless. Alan crucified him and Sal was betrayed by him. At that moment, as Medusa stared him down, a power began to emanate from his body. Even the griffin didn't know what was happening, but something was changing within Sal. Suddenly, Medusa's head rolled onto the ground, decapitated. Sal Cooper felt like he was transforming into something grand and monstrous. As he collected Medusa's blood, he recalled that in his past life, he had a sword talent that could have been S rank or higher, but the matriarch had used magic to strip that talent away and give it to Alan. He laughed at the irony of it all as things became more and more interesting. The griffin, still not understanding what was happening, simply took took the opportunity to flee. Sal Cooper, now increasingly deranged, shouted to the griffin, "Hey, is your head harder than stone?" The griffin, confused and unable to comprehend, said nothing. But moments later, the two of them flew out of the cave. The griffin thought that Sal had just been using him to destroy the secret realm from the beginning, but since he could still heal his son, he decided to let it go. Meanwhile, Medusa, under the rubble, seemed to be stirring. It was uncertain whether she had truly awakened, but something strange was happening. The griffin, now at the top of his mountain, spoke to Sal Cooper with gratitude. "With the title of Griffin, I bless you so that your body will never be harmed, no matter how you're attacked." Sal's body began to strengthen, and his wounds started to heal. He thought this was great, but for now, he needed to hide his S-rank sword talent to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Sal handed a vial to the griffin, telling him to give it to the hatchling, and its wings would be healed after that. The hatchling, after drinking the liquid, began flying through the sky. The griffin was moved to see his baby finally flying. Watching the hatchling in the air, Sal Cooper commented, "He may know how to fly now, but if he doesn't accept a master before reaching adulthood, he'll be just another ordinary bird." The griffin asked what he meant, but Sal simply offered advice as a passing stranger. The griffin then realized that Sal was right. If his master hadn't fed the hatchling human brains daily, it would never have awakened its intelligence and grown stronger. But the master had died hundreds of years ago, and the griffin didn't know where to find another powerful person like him. He looked at Sal Cooper and said, "Please accept my son as your pet monster." Sal only smiled, realizing that the griffin had fallen into his trap. He replied, "All right, I'll accept the hatchling as my monster, but on one condition. I want all the information you have on Alan Cooper, as well as the precious key that can open the place where the Cooper family worships the spirit of Bleed's sword." It was already night at the castle when someone shouted, unable to find the cause. The young master was fainting for no apparent reason, and no one knew why. A man apologized, explaining that the young master had the protection of the Shadow Oath. After all, those other shadows helped him endure the pain. She herself thought that was true, but the whole situation seemed very strange. Alan had been like this since the day of the ceremony, so there must have been someone behind it all. An old man then mentioned another urgent matter. Sal Cooper took first place as expected in the competency test, but there's a detail. He used the griffin to kill Ty and nephew Walker, and even tamed the griffin's son as his pet monster. The woman, surprised, choked on her tea and asked, "Where is he now?" At that moment, Sal Cooper entered the room. The lady smiled and asked why he had killed the Walkers. With an even more psychopathic smile, he replied, "I did it for my family. If an officer was killed by a 3-year-old, he was worthless. Don't you agree, miss?" The woman was speechless, and that was the expression he wanted to see: anger, fear, and hatred. Even if she played all her cards, he would not feel afraid. The woman then ordered the butler, "Reward Sal with a bath in the Spring of Eden, which serves to recover the body." He thanked her, but as soon as the door closed, the woman told the butler to speed up the research. Sal's talent must be taken away. "I won't let this brat escape next time." Later, Sal was in the Spring of Eden, thinking about the griffin's words. The master, before dying, had used forbidden magic to seal his soul beneath the Spring of Eden. The goal was to pass on swordsmanship to the true heir who possessed the necessary talent. To reach that point, Sal would have to swim through the underground current to a cave, where the key would guide his way. As he walked, humans in the water commented that he was the one who came in first place during training. At that moment, 2 boys nicknamed Big Head and Tooth arrived, calling Sal nothing but a bastard. Tooth mocked, "Congratulations, my friend, you really ran today, didn't you?" Sal remembered that in his past life, these two were lackeys of Alan, doing whatever it took to get what they wanted. When Tooth tried to punch him, Sal grabbed his hand and twisted it, showing a bit of his power. Big Head, scared, tried to attack him with a knife, but ended up stabbing his own friend because Sal used him as a human shield. Shocked, Tooth fell into the river, and the magic of the spring began to take effect. Sal thought the griffin had been right to warn him about the dangers of the water. He needed to find a way to get to the bottom without touching it. At that moment, Sal heard someone crying for help. A Meg was dragging a girl by the hair, saying she was worthless. Seeing the scene, Sal asked if her name was Andrea. When the knight tried to strike her, Sal split him in half with a single blow. The girl on the ground didn't understand what had just happened, while the others ran off, threatening to report Sal to the Ashino family. Sal extended his hand to the girl and asked if she was alright. Andrea, nervous, saw him as a Prince Charming, but from his perspective, she was trembling in fear. He apologized for scaring her, and she thanked him, introducing herself as Andrea. Then she asked for the name of the hero who had saved her. Of course, it was our king, Sal Cooper, the master of the neck chop. Sal remembered that in his past life, Andrea had healed his wounds and was his best friend, possessing impressive magical talent. They'd fought together on the front lines, and she also loved him. She thanked him again for saving her, and Sal blushed, thinking she was very cute. He commented, "Saving a lady is the duty of a knight." He then asked if she knew a way to cross the spring without touching the water. Andrea replied, "So you've noticed it too. The spring has magic that heals wounds, but whoever uses it can no longer accept any other type of healing. Only the spring will be able to heal you." Sal realized that this was a way to control the shadows, forcing them to beg the family for help. Andrea continued, saying that as thanks, she would show him a way to enter without getting wet. She used the duck magic, a spell that allowed people to swim like ducks without wetting their feathers. Sal thought the name could be better, but at that moment, knights arrived to capture him as a murderer. Desperate, Sal grabbed Andrea's hand and jumped into the water, swimming through the underground current. Andrea tried to warn him to to get out, but both were pulled into a storm. Later, Andrea tried to wake Sal in a dark cave. He looked around trying to figure out if they were in the right place. He told her that the key would open the location of the sword's spirit, but there was no door there. Andrea suggested that the door might need to be summoned, so she took the key and said, Key, hear my call. Moments later, the power of the key began swirling around her, but two monstrous plants emerged to attack them. Luckily, Sal managed to save her in time, and then a door appeared. It was a portal leading to another place. He called for Andrea, but she had fainted. With no choice, Sal carried her through, thinking she needed to rest there, knowing that an ugly battle was about to begin. Once he stepped through the portal, he saw a place filled with bodies. At the top of the pile was a thin, strange monster, who turned with a hideous face and said, Today, I have a guest. The creature went on to explain that from afar, the Spring of Eden appeared to be just a medicinal place, but it was actually where the Cooper family discarded their concubines. Now he understood their true fate. They had all become food for the sword demon. At that moment, the monster appeared in front of him, saying, That's the smell of an S-rank talent. Sal jumped back, surprised, wondering how the creature knew that. The monster asked if he was a Juan Cooper, remarking that Sal didn't seem spoiled at all, then charged, crazed, asking if he was a bastard son of the family. Sal crossed swords with the monster, who continued to say he wouldn't give up the inheritance so easily. But Sal was confident he had come here solely to kill this creature. The monster attacked again with its blood swords, comparing Sal to Blood Cooper. The battle intensified throughout the space, and Sal struggled to keep up with the pace. As they fought, the monster taunted Sal, saying he was still just a brat. Sal, lying on the ground, thought that Blood had spent a lot of power to seal his soul, and even though it was difficult, there was still a small hope of success. At that moment, a large cross was summoned behind the monster, who panicked, shouting to activate the blood restriction formation. Sal responded that the monster had been dead for so long that it didn't know the Empire had already developed a way to counter blood magic. He said he only needed to take the monster's heart. He charged to attack it, but the creature, with its tongue out, said it wasn't afraid. Sal leaped away as the monster laughed at his action. Now the battle will get serious. Several blood spirits appeared, and even though Sal defended himself, their strength was overwhelming. Sal ended up getting his back slashed as the spirits relentlessly attacked. He used the protection of the sacred sword, but it was useless. With a simple touch, the monster shattered his magic. The creature then lifted Sal by the neck, saying he was just a rat about to be devoured. Sal felt his mana and blood being drained, while the monster commented that his soul reminded him of a concubine he had once devoured. The monster opened its giant mouth, ready to swallow Sal whole. In that moment, Sal remembered his mother, who used to put him to bed and promise she would never abandon him. But one day, he brought a flower to his mother, only to collapse on the ground as she apologized, saying she was leaving. He called for her, but she never returned. The other children mocked him, calling him an abandoned monster. Now more serious, Sal slashed the monster's hand with his sword. He was certain this demon had been responsible for his mother's disappearance. The monster recovered with blood magic and threw Sal aside, but felt the impact of the attack, having consumed too much energy. Needing more strength, the creature began devouring more bodies. Sal reappeared, asking if the monster was enjoying its meal, and with a swift motion of his sword, he split the creature in half. As the monster fell to the ground, Sal saw an image of his mother calling out to him. Even so, the demon was still alive, thinking it needed to devour more. Ruthless, Sal pierced it again. The monster tried to propose that Sal possess its sword as a spirit, but Sal refused and obliterated the demon once and for all. He let his sword fall, knowing that the monster's power would be absorbed by the weapon. In the end, it was just another beast, but in a reflex, Sal remembered his mother's words, telling him that he was not a monster, and that she would always be by his side. At that moment, a voice called out to Sal. It was Andrea, running towards him and asking why he was covered in dirt. She began to heal him, and Sal remembered that in his past life, Andrea had met the same fate as the concubines. He embraced her, determined not to let that tragedy happen again. With the disappearance of the sword's spirit, the guardians of the spring were doomed to die. The servants who had witnessed Sal's cruelty never dared to mess with him or Andrea again. Afterwards, Sal was accused by the matriarch of causing the spirit's disappearance, but without evidence, she could only pursue him. She tried everything, poisons, medications, but Sal always resisted. In the end, 4 years passed. Now on the training field, Alan was defeating yet another opponent, saying that the man would die with such weak skills. Two men watched from afar, Duke Isaac with red hair and Duke Leon Cooper. Meanwhile, 4 knights advanced on Sal. He merely raised his sword from the shadows and, without moving from his spot, cut down all who attacked him. The Duke, observing from above, realized that Sal had moved 9 times and was far beyond his age level. The guardian of the silver sword, Alan, couldn't stand seeing Sal steal his spotlight. Alan came down and challenged Sal to a duel. Sal accepted calmly, as it was an opportunity to test that weakling's skills. However, Alan planned to kill Sal and pretend it was an accident. Everyone was excited to see the fight between the two family prodigies. Alan charged forward, confident of his victory, but Sal, bored, asked if Alan's mother wasn't feeding him properly. He uncrossed his swords as Alan rushed forward, incredulous. Sal remarked that Alan's power was so weak it was obvious he didn't have the talent for S-rank swords. At that moment, Sal advanced, declaring that everyone would see his true power. With a precise strike, he cut Alan's eye. The knights ran over as Alan screamed in pain. Duke Isaac commented that the difference in skill was clear, and the other Duke Duke, furious, ordered him to show more respect. Isaac apologized, reminding him that Alan was supposed to marry his younger sister. They began arguing over the marriage, but soon changed the subject, recalling the joint operation between the families, which would take place in 10 days. Isaac made it clear he didn't like Alan, and as he walked away, the others discussed the potential of Sal Cooper, the son of one of Leon's former mistresses. Leon finally understood where Sal's extraordinary talent with swords came from and ordered that the boy be summoned to the study room. When Sal arrived, Leon observed him closely, while Sal, without hesitation, asked what the master's orders were. Leon, on the other hand, reflected on the boy's talent, which could not be ignored. The man watched closely as Sal asked what the master's orders were. He thought he couldn't sense the boy's talent. Perhaps he was intentionally hiding his abilities. However, deep down, he was just an easy-to-read boy. Sal then announced that in 10 days, he would lead the Shadow team to Crystal City, along with the Isaac family, to retrieve the dragon egg. He handed Sal a sword capable of activating the teleportation portal, but reflected that, to obtain the egg, he would have to face the dragon's wrath. Still, he accepted the mission and made an unexpected request, surprising the master. The next day, he, his Griffin, Andrea, and the Shadows set off. Andrea remarked that, as a servant of the group, it wouldn't be appropriate to ride the Griffin, but he simply asked the others if it was all right. Everyone hesitantly replied, "Of course, sir, it's all right." When they arrived at a building, some wondered if that was the final destination. Someone mentioned that the Cooper family was unaware of the glory of that place, and then Gloria, the chief's sister and Alan's fiancée, introduced herself to Sal, shaking his hand. However, he ignored the gesture and asked Andrea to stay with the Griffin, assuring her he would return soon. Bowen continued following him, trying to start a conversation, but he only said that if they didn't activate the portal by sunset, the journey would have been in vain. He reflected that she was a troublesome woman, always seeking him out to train, but now he only prayed that everything would go right. At the formation altar, he inserted the two swords and the city portal opened. At that moment, one of the men behind him commented that he would destroy the Coopers and steal the egg for the Isaac family to earn a big reward. Sal ordered everyone to retreat quickly, but an explosion occurred. A sentinel of light, protector of the city, appeared, frightening the soldiers. Gloria then advanced with her cutting thorns, bravely confronting the sentinel. She fought a treacherous soldier who tried to attack his own allies, but soon found herself flanked by two sentinels. Sal, without hesitation, defeated them all, though 4 more pursued him. He raised his sword and commanded the Shadows to form a barrier. At that moment, everyone plunged their swords into the ground and a dark power began to encircle the sentinels, as the power of shadows always prevails. Sal advanced, dodging attacks while the knights, impressed, remarked that the sentinels had been defeated and that this boy was a true prodigy. Even Gloria fell silent, witnessing his power. After the battle, Sal absorbed the crystal's power, ascending to the rank of Master of the Golden Sword. His next step was to place the crystal inside the altar. Upon doing so, an earthquake began and the altar descended, revealing the passage to the dragon's lair. The environment below was dark, filled with scaly eggs. Everyone was awestruck by the number of dragon eggs, but realized they were attracting the dragon's attention. It emerged roaring, and Gloria and Sal prepared their swords for confrontation. Meanwhile, the others were tasked with collecting the eggs and leaving quickly. At that moment, one of the Shadows climbed up alone with an egg and pressed a button, as the head of the family had ordered only they would keep the egg, leaving Sal behind. The others protested, and Gloria criticized the act, saying they had abandoned the team. Even so, Sal launched into the attack, confident he would not die there. The dragon roared and threw him to the other side of the field. Gloria tried to get closer, but the dragon unleashed a powerful fire breath. She defended herself with her sword shining in the moonlight, while Sal, fallen, asked for her help to delay the dragon as he aimed for the heart. Recognizing her own skill, she advanced, dodging the dragon's attacks and guiding Sal for a precise strike. But as she turned to him, she saw that he was motionless further back. Beginning the dance of the Sword of Destruction, she struck several points on the dragon's body, believing she had defeated it. The soldiers started mocking the dragon, but it rose, roaring with strength. Gloria couldn't understand how it was still alive, but then Sal drew the legendary Sword of Perseus, determined to use all its power with the Blood Shadow Slash. The dragon was engulfed by a dark shroud, and Sal condensed the power, transforming the dragon's blood into a clone. This was forbidden magic, allowed only to the leader of the Cooper family. Gloria understood he had used her as bait to weaken the dragon, but he advanced, confident, as he wouldn't sit around waiting for his own death. With a single powerful strike, he decapitated the dragon. People ran to see how he was, but he pointed his sword, ordering them not to approach. Then he clutched his face, writhing in agony, as the dragon's spirit tormented his mind, saying he would not escape unscathed after this feat. To maintain his strength, he would have to consume flesh constantly, and he looked toward Gloria, considering her as his first prey. He struggled against these instincts, but ended up leaping toward Gloria. At that moment, Andrea appeared and used her magic, managing to push him to the ground. Andrea approached, trying to bring him back as he was sinking deeper into darkness. After some time, he finally awoke outside. Andrea explained that she had used purification magic and that, thanks to it, he wouldn't transform again. She revealed that she was carrying the only remaining dragon dragon egg, and that the traitor who had fooled with it had been captured by the others. She assured him that she hadn't mentioned the egg to the family and informed him that Gloria had already left, so Sal's mission could be considered complete. Sal thanked Andrea, commenting that he wasn't too worried about the egg. His initial plan was to take her to a safe place and make the family believe he had accidentally died so that she could leave the family safely. At that moment, he shouted to his griffin, "Come here, you cursed bird. Can't you handle a simple task?" The griffin squawked as if apologizing, while Andrea explained that it had been worried and insisted on following him. Sal, annoyed, asked the griffin if it had finally learned how to respond. Just then, two men called out to Sal Cooper and drew their swords. Sal questioned till you've finally shown your true intentions. He suspected they might try to steal the dragon egg, but he was surprised when one of them, the buck-toothed one, and the other, a chubby man, eliminated the traitor. They then knelt before Sal, saying, "Young master, please forgive our previous rudeness. If it weren't for you, we would have been abandoned." All the other shadow warriors also bowed, pledging loyalty to Sal unto death. He, confused and hungry, didn't understand the reason for such devotion. Andrea called him and pointed behind him. The dragon egg began to crack, and in an instant, the shell broke and a demonic mini-dragon flew out. Everyone was impressed by the dragon's birth. Sal raised his hand and, in a firm voice, asked if the dragon would accept him as its master. The dragon landed beside him, letting him pet it, signaling its acceptance. The men around exclaimed, "The demon dragon has been tamed by Master Sal." They congratulated him on having a new pet alongside the griffin, and from that day, the rebellious force of Sal Cooper against the family was born. The sun beat down in the castle as a boy asked his mother, "When can I go to the horse race track?" The mother replied, "As soon as your father finishes work." At that moment, the father arrived, throwing papers onto the table and grumbling that all the boy wanted was to have fun. He commented irritably that Sal Cooper had not only killed a demon dragon, but also tamed his offspring. The mother defended her son, asking why he was so upset with a child, saying that if Alan had been sent instead of Sal, he probably would have done the same. Taking her son by the hand, the mother said, "Leave that old grump alone. Come join mommy at the racetrack today." They left, and the boy asked if they could bring the whip. The mother, with the fan in her hand, asked the butler about the progress on the research on deprivation magic, a spell capable of removing someone's abilities. The butler informed her, "Don't worry, ma'am, the research was successfully completed. Now we just need to find someone with S-rank talent to test it." She then looked around with a strange expression, speaking highly of the plan, because this time she would finally rid herself of that brat. Then the scene cuts to 5 years later. Andrea says that after this, he will be completely purified and will not be corrupted by the demon in the future. Additionally, he'll be able to use all his swordsmanship talent. He thanks Andrea while sitting, and she, now grown, responds that she should be the one thanking him, as she loved the staff she received. At that moment, they both notice a shadow in the window. Sal opens the window and asks who is there, but the silhouette flees. They deduce it was probably the butler. Just then, someone opens the door. It's Bucktooth and Chubby, saying they planned everything as necessary. They kneel and reveal that they secretly followed the butler and discover he recently summoned dark mages for a ceremony that will take place in 3 days. They explain that the butler disclosed to the mages that he had found another target with S-level talent capable of wielding extremely high-level magic. Sal reflects that the ceremony will indeed happen and wonders why they didn't come directly to him but instead chose another target with such high talent. Perhaps that target is Andrea herself. 3 days later, someone complains that the warehouse is a mess and decides to tidy it up with magic. At that moment, the butler appears stealthily behind Andrea and places a cloth over her mouth, causing her to lose consciousness bit by bit. Soon, they are in the midst of the ritual. Andrea is tied up, surrounded by dark mages, with the butler by her side, chanting ominous words. He explains that by combining the blood from her head and heart in the magic circle, her talents will transfer to him. However, as he raises the knife, Andrea simply vanishes. She then reappears behind him, revealing that it was all a magical illusion, for Andrea was not as naive as they thought. She activates her starlight chain magic, which envelops the butler and traps him. He taunts her, saying, "Ah, you clever girl, you'll see when Madame finds out." But he soon realizes that the one he should fear is Sal himself, who is about to arrive. Sal appears, questioning why everyone is standing still and why they haven't advanced on Andrea. Meanwhile, Andrea thinks about what Sal had told her earlier. "Now just close your eyes." At that moment, they hear a roar from the other side. A giant dragon and a griffin appear, causing panic among the mages. The mages, desperate, wonder what will happen. The griffin attacks some of their feet, while the dragon lunges at others, roaring and breathing fire. The butler considers that maybe both are headed straight for them. At that moment, Sal appears with his unmistakable style and wild hair, holding his sword before the old man, demanding to know why Andrea was targeted. The old man admits that the deprivation magic can only be used once per target, and to ensure Alan would inherit the talent, they chose Andrea for the experiment. Realizing their intentions, Sal's expression darkens with anger, declaring he cannot forgive the butler for this act. He slices his hand, swearing a shadow oath to ensure that, upon returning to the main family, he will report that the deprivation ceremony test was a success and that they can attack Sal immediately. The old man still questions why he's doing this, but Sal responds that it's to reveal reveal Alan's true nature. The butler then approaches a lady reporting that the deprivation experiment was a success, while Alan, in a triumphant tone, invites Miss Gloria for a stroll in the garden. She rejects him, calling him a filthy brat, while his mother, smiling, asks if he's absolutely sure. He confirms, saying that on the next full moon, which coincidentally is the coming-of-age ceremony of the young master, they can finally act. She congratulates him, asserting that his long-held wish will finally be realized and that Alan will secure his place on the family's throne. Meanwhile, Alan tries to impress Gloria, who ignores him as he continues bragging about being the family's great charmer. In a moment of exasperation, she points her sword at him, threatening him for his foolish words and saying he's a failed master who doesn't even deserve to be her fiancé. She moves to attack him, but Sal steps in and deflects her sword, challenging Alan. Ashamed, Alan tries to mask his anger, saying he didn't ask for anyone's help. Just then, Gloria grabs Sal's arm, blushing and pleading with him to train her, saying he should seriously consider her request, as it wasn't every day someone could train with her. At the same time, Alan was already boiling with anger, seeing Sal winning over his fiancé right in front of him. However, just then, Alan's mother appeared in the background, saying, "Alan, come back here and obey your mother." He walked off with a scowl, saying that since Miss Gloria wouldn't budge, he'd leave. She shouted back, "Go take cover in the shade and don't come back." After that, Gloria commented that now that the nuisance was gone, Sal would have no choice but to accept her request. Somewhat reluctantly, he replied, "All right, I accept, but you'll have to accept a request from me as well." Sal's request was to be recommended to her elder brother, Yuxak. Soon after, Sal was face to face with the Duke, stating that he could ruin the engagement between Gloria and Alan. However, to do so, he needed alone the family treasure, the illusory temple box. Sal recalled that in his past life, Duke Isaac was dissatisfied with the playboy Alan and the alliance with the Cooper family. He had requested the engagement's cancellation, but the royal court had rejected the plea. At that moment, the Duke, indignant, brandishes his sword and says that Alan is just a brat who doesn't know his place. Sal counters that precisely because of who he is. He'll be able to solve the problems of this poor soul. Seeing the sword, Sal recalls that the Duke is a youth with S-level talent. They cross swords, and Sal suggests that if they cannot cancel the engagement, they can destroy the young master Alan. He asks the Duke what he thinks of the idea. A month later, the butler announces, "Madam, everything is ready, but Sal Cooper is not in a lineup of legitimate sons." Meanwhile, the young master had gone to fetch the others, who were complaining that they didn't know why they had been summoned, reinforcing Alan's position as the rightful heir, while the others were only illegitimate sons of the Cooper family. Someone then informs the head of the family that the guests are already seated and awaiting his orders to begin the ceremony. At that moment, Duke Isaac enters and remarks, "What a coincidence, Duke Cooper. Shall we have a chat?" Duke Cooper, in an arrogant tone, responds that he doesn't recall inviting Isaac, but given that it's the coming-of-age ceremony of his sister's future fiancé, he understands his presence. At that moment, Sal, in the background, comments that everyone is there and that it's time to open the illusory temple box. The Duke's assistant steps onto the stage and reveals the box, showing the abyssal portal opening and weaving shadows into illusions. Everyone draws their swords, pointing them at the box. Just then, a large magic circle appears and Sal remains still, watching. Then Alan appears and confronts him. "What are you doing here, boy?" At that moment, someone begins to have a strange dream, picturing a dark room where Sal is bound to a cross and shackled. Alan, wearing a sadistic smile, raises a sword and declares that Sal's swordsmanship talent will now be his since Sal is nothing but a bastard of the family. Andrea wakes up from the nightmare surrounded by tomatoes and uses her starlight power to sense that this was more than just a dream. She runs through the forest, shouting Sal's name, worried for him. Desperate, she sees something ahead, someone handing Sal a glass of wine. Andrea tries to use her magic to prevent the worst, but is interrupted by someone calling her name. She turns and sees another figure approaching who grabs her and covers her mouth. At that moment, a madame watches from afar and declares that her plan will succeed and Sal Cooper will finally be destroyed. Amidst the trees, Alan hands the glass of wine to Sal, who, after drinking, collapses to the ground. Alan celebrates, certain that he will have his revenge. The scene shifts to a vision Andrea had in her dream. Sal, tied to a cross, confronted by Alan, who says, "You got your revenge, didn't you, dragon? Now take this to the face." He continues striking Sal, claiming that all the glory will now be his. At this point, Alan's mother arrives and orders him to stop, saying they must act before it's too late. The butler then hands Alan a small knife he will use to complete the ritual. With a triumphant grin, Alan approaches Sal and attempts to stab him, determined to take everything Sal has, power, glory, and even Andrea. However, to everyone's surprise, Sal begins to laugh, even with a knife embedded in his chest. No one understands why, and he takes advantage of the confusion to break free from his bonds. He commands everyone to open their eyes, and with a snap of his fingers, shadow contracts appear, visible to all at the gathering. The guests are astonished by what they see. They discover that Alan's supposed S-rank talent was a fraud. Alan's mother begins to worry, but he tries to justify himself, claiming it was a trap set by Sal. At that moment, someone claps sarcastically and asks Duke Cooper if he too found the spectacle impressive. The Duke, incredulous, observes the situation while Alan's mother attempts to defend him, claiming responsibility for the plan. Alan is struck, causing him to fall to the ground. Sal, from across the room, contemplates the cruelty of the situation as Alan, fallen, mutters that he's merely a bastard and that everything should rightfully belong to him. His mother tries to silence him, aware they are at a party filled with influential people. His father then raises his sword and declares, "My descendants hear my command. The succession consortium begins today." Hey everyone, did you enjoy the story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.